August 1944, Paris, France. Adolf Hitler picks up the phone and gives an order that will determine the fate of one of the most beautiful cities in human history. Burn it. Destroy every bridge over the Seine. Demolish every monument. Every museum. Every landmark. The Eiffel Tower. Notre Dame Cathedral. The Louvre, all of it. Leave nothing for the Allies but ash and rubble. The man on the other end of that phone was General Dietrich von Choltitz, military governor of Paris. One of Germany's most loyal and decorated officers. A man who had never disobeyed an order in his entire career. Hitler asked him directly, "Is Paris burning?" Von Choltitz looked out his window at the city spread before him. The bridges still standing. The monuments still intact. The most beautiful city in the world still alive. And he lied to Adolf Hitler. What happened in the days before that phone call, and why a loyal German general chose to save a city instead of destroy it, is one of the most extraordinary stories of the entire war. To understand why Dietrich von Choltitz made the decision he made, you first have to understand who he was. Von Choltitz was born in 1894 in Germany into a military family with a proud tradition of service stretching back generations. Military life was not a career choice for him. It was his identity. His blood, his entire reason for being. He served in World War I as a young officer and proved himself capable and courageous. When World War II began, he rose quickly through the ranks. He was known as a precise professional soldier who executed his orders without question and without hesitation. He had a reputation that served him well throughout the war. And a reputation that had also cost him something he could never fully talk about. In 1942, von Choltitz had overseen the destruction of Sevastopol in the Soviet Union. He had followed his orders there. The city had been razed. Thousands of civilians had suffered. He had done his duty. And that duty had left marks on him that his military bearing could not entirely hide. By August 1944, when Hitler appointed him military governor of Paris, von Choltitz was a different man than the unquestioning officer he had once been. Paris in August 1944 was a city holding its breath. The German occupation had lasted 4 years. 4 years of rationing, curfews, fear, and the constant presence of German forces in every street and café and boulevard of the most famous city in the world. But now everything was changing. The D-Day landings in June 1944 had broken the German line in Normandy. Allied forces were pushing rapidly across France. Every day the news was worse for the German forces occupying Paris. The French resistance inside the city was growing bolder. Strikes and skirmishes were breaking out across Paris. The population could feel liberation coming, and some could not wait for the Allies to arrive. Von Choltitz arrived in Paris on August 9, 1944 with orders to maintain control and prepare the city's defenses. What he found when he arrived shocked him. Not the French resistance. Not the military situation. What shocked Dietrich von Choltitz was Paris itself. He had spent 4 years fighting across Europe's ruins. Destroyed cities. Bombed landscapes. Civilian suffering on a scale that defied description. And here was Paris intact. Beautiful, alive. Something stirred in him that his military training had no category for. On August 23, 1944, Adolf Hitler issued the order that would define Dietrich von Choltitz forever. Paris was to be destroyed. Every bridge over the Seine, there were over 70 of them, was to be blown up. Every major building was to be demolished. Explosives were to be placed throughout the city and detonated before the Allies could reach it. Hitler's reasoning was cold and strategic. If Germany could not have Paris, neither could the Allies. A destroyed Paris would slow the Allied advance, and deny them a symbolic victory. Von Choltitz received the order in writing. He received it verbally. He received phone calls from Hitler's headquarters demanding confirmation that the preparations were underway. He confirmed them. He told headquarters that everything was being prepared. That the explosives were being placed. That Paris would be destroyed as ordered. Then he put down the phone, and did almost nothing that he had promised. He had the explosives placed. He allowed the preparations to be made. But he delayed. He found reasons to wait. He stalled for time while the Allied forces got closer every hour. The question that history has argued about ever since is why. Historians have debated for decades exactly why von Choltitz refused to destroy Paris. He gave several reasons in interviews and in his memoirs after the war, some of them practical, some of them deeply personal. His first reason was military. By August 1944, Germany was clearly losing the war. Destroying Paris would not change the outcome. It would only guarantee that von Choltitz went down in history as the man who burned one of the world's greatest cities for nothing. His second reason was more surprising. He had met Hitler in person before taking the Paris command. And what he saw at that meeting had shaken him deeply. He later said that Hitler had seemed unwell, disconnected from reality, issuing orders that had no basis in the actual military situation. Von Choltitz left that meeting with a conviction he had never expected to reach. The man giving him orders was no longer rational. His third reason was the simplest, and perhaps the most human. He looked at Paris. To civilization itself, the art, the architecture, the irreplaceable human achievement represented in every building and bridge and boulevard. And he could not do it, he simply could not do it. As the Allied forces closed in on Paris, Hitler's calls became more desperate and more furious. He demanded updates, he demanded confirmation. He demanded to know why Paris was still standing. His generals relayed the question directly to von Choltitz multiple times. Is Paris burning? Von Choltitz had explosives placed throughout the city. He had the technical capability to carry out the order at any moment. All it would take was one command. He never gave it. Instead, he did something extraordinary. He made secret contact with the Swedish consul general in Paris, a diplomat named Raoul Nordling. Through Nordling, he opened back-channel communications with the approaching Allied forces. He was telling the Allies exactly where his forces were, how strong his defenses were, and reading between the lines that Paris would not be destroyed if the Allies moved quickly. He was surrendering, not to save himself, but to save the city. On August 25, 1944, Allied forces entered Paris. Von Choltitz formally surrendered to French General Philippe Leclerc. When the surrender document was signed, a French officer asked him why he had not carried out Hitler's orders. Von Choltitz looked at him and said, "I did not want to go down in history as the man who destroyed Paris." The liberation of Paris on August 25, 1944 was one of the most joyful moments of the entire war. Crowds flooded the streets. 4 years of occupation released in a single overwhelming outpouring of relief and celebration. French flags appeared from windows that had hidden them for years. People danced in the streets, strangers embraced, women who had not smiled in public for 4 years were weeping with joy. General Charles de Gaulle marched down the Champs-Élysées the following day in one of the most iconic images of the entire war. The Free French forces returning to their capital. France itself reborn. The Eiffel Tower still standing, Notre Dame still standing, the Louvre still standing. The bridges of the Seine still standing. Everything that Hitler had ordered destroyed was intact. And the man who had disobeyed that order was now a prisoner of war. Von Choltitz was taken into Allied custody. He would spend the rest of the war in a prisoner of war camp, while Paris danced. The story of Dietrich von Choltitz saving Paris is not without controversy. After the war, he published a memoir called Soldat unter Soldaten, Soldier Among Soldiers, in which he portrayed himself as the savior of Paris, a man of conscience who defied Hitler to preserve one of humanity's greatest treasures. Some historians accepted this version of events entirely. Others were more skeptical. They pointed out that by August 1944, Germany was clearly losing the war. Destroying Paris would have achieved nothing militarily. Von Choltitz was also aware that Allied forces were close. A general who destroyed Paris and then surrendered days later would face very different treatment as a prisoner than one who had preserved it. Some argued that von Choltitz was not so much a man of conscience as a man of calculation, that he made the decision that gave him the best chance of surviving the war and facing history favorably. Von Choltitz himself always rejected this interpretation. He insisted that his decision was moral, not strategic, that he had looked at Paris and seen something worth saving regardless of the military situation. The truth is probably somewhere between the two. And perhaps that is what makes him human. Dietrich von Choltitz was released from prisoner of war status in 1947. He returned to Germany and lived quietly. He was never tried for war crimes despite his role in the destruction of Sevastopol earlier in the war. The fact that he had saved Paris gave him a protection that other German officers did not have. France treated him with a respect that was remarkable given recent history. He was invited back to Paris multiple times. French veterans and politicians met with him. The city he had been ordered to destroy welcomed him as something approaching a friend. He died in Baden-Baden, Germany on November 4, 1966. Paris sent official condolences. The city that Hitler had ordered burned to the ground sent its condolences to the family of the German general who had been ordered to burn it. His name is not widely known today. Most people who walk across the bridges of the Seine, or stand before Notre Dame or look up at the Eiffel Tower, have no idea who Dietrich von Choltitz was. But every one of those things exists today in part because of a decision he made in August 1944. A decision to look at something beautiful and choose to keep it alive. Here's the power play and twisted truth at the heart of this story. Adolf Hitler believed that power meant the ability to destroy. That if he could not have Paris, nobody could. That burning the most beautiful city in the world was a legitimate military and political act. That is what absolute power looks like when it loses its connection to humanity. The twisted truth is this. The man Hitler trusted most to carry out that order was the same man who decided it was an order not worth following. Von Choltitz had spent his entire career in a system built on absolute obedience. Follow orders. Do not question. Execute without hesitation. And at the moment when that system demanded its most destructive act, he stepped outside it. Not dramatically. Not heroically in the movie sense, just quietly, with delays and deceptions and back-channel conversations. He chose civilization over orders. And civilization is still standing because he did. Dietrich von Choltitz was not a perfect man. He had followed orders earlier in the war that caused tremendous suffering. He was a product of a system that demanded obedience above everything. But in August 1944, when that system demanded its most senseless and destructive act, he found a line he would not cross. History's Wildside is about power plays and twisted truths. And here is the final twisted truth of this story. The most powerful man in the world ordered one of history's greatest acts of destruction. And a single general stopped him. Not with an army. Not with a political movement. Not with a dramatic public stand. Just with delays and deceptions. In a quiet refusal to give one final order. Every person who has ever walked the streets of Paris, every person who has ever stood before Notre Dame or crossed the Seine or looked up at the Eiffel Tower. They are all, without knowing it, the beneficiaries of one German general's conscience. Or calculation, or perhaps both. Subscribe to History's Wildside for a new story every Sunday. Power plays, twisted truths, and the moments that history almost forgot. This has been History's Wildside. I will see you next Sunday.